Okay, good morning. So, let's talk about fear. Okay, I fear that you guys are going to see my rolls. That's what I fear. No, but I have been a person in my life that has just been completely plagued with fears. In fact, I would not drive in the center lane on the freeway because what if there was a blowout? Then where would I pull? I couldn't pull to the shoulder. I'd pull right into oncoming traffic and I'd probably die. I was afraid of swimming in swimming pools in the dark. It didn't matter if there was lights or not. In fact, the lights made it a little more creepy. And I'm not talking about like I was 10 years old and I thought there was a shark in the water. I was 30 years old and I thought there was a shark in the swimming pool, that it could live in chlorine. I don't know. But I feared a lot of things, and probably the worst thing I feared, what I feared the most, here as I move this a little bit closer, what I feared the most was intimate conversation. Like, I'm perfectly okay with public speaking. I have no problem talking to a big group of people as long as they don't talk back. It's like, yeah, pay attention to me as long as I don't have to like really hold a conversation with you, because then I'm afraid. Then I worry, what do you think of me? Did what I just said, was that stupid? Did it sound stupid? Or maybe I don't have anything interesting to say. I didn't practice it, so I can't practice a conversation, and I get really nervous and scared, and I would just rather not speak to people. So I fear that. So I was a person that was plagued with fear. Thank the Lord, I've been mostly delivered from that. There's fear still rears its ugly head from time to time, and I'll tell you the story of my deliverance, I guess, but not right now. I'll tell you about it though. So when dealing with fear, I heard that there's 3 reactions. You can fight your fear, flee your fear, or freeze in the face of fear. So fight, flight, or freeze. So those are, some regular reactions that we have. One person once told me that fear keeps you alive. I actually used to live by that. Like, I wouldn't go in dark alleyways or, do anything daring because, fear keeps you alive. But then I had to think about it, and I became a Christian, and I'm reading the Word, and I'm figuring out that sure, fear may keep us alive, but what kind of life are we living? Is it a life worth living? What's our quality of life like if we are living in constant fear? So I want to read to you guys, and I have my Bible ready today. Woo woo! I don't have to go looking for it or try to Google it on my phone. So here I'm going to be reading out of 1 Samuel chapter 17, and I'm going to start with verses 3 through 11. We'll let the plane go by. Now, so we're talking about David and Goliath, right? The Philistines and the Israelites. So the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side with a valley between them. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had a bronze armor on his legs, and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. I heard that a shekel was 75 pounds. I'll have to look that up. If my viewers know, please tell me in the comment section. I always wanted to say that. Comment. Click subscribe. Follow. Click like. Oh, I've always wanted to say that. Okay. Let's get back to the reading of the Word. Okay, so now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourself, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So obviously we're going to be talking about fear today, as if you didn't know in the beginning when I said, let's talk about fear. All right, so the Israelites were afraid of Goliath. Saul was afraid of Goliath. Everyone was afraid of Goliath. This is a huge monster of a man. So in this instance, we have fear keeping them alive. They're not fighting him. They're not going to die if they don't fight him. They're frozen. They're not, fight, flight, or freeze. They're not going to fight. They're not running away. They're just freezing. They're freezing in the face of their fear, freezing in the face of danger. But what was their quality of life? So fear may be keeping them alive, but what was their quality of life? Every morning they had to wake up to the taunting of this giant who was calling them names, who was calling their God names, who was calling their king names. He was abusive and a bully. Every day they had to wake up to this. What kind of quality of life is that? Life had to be pretty poor in quality. And I know what that's like because I lived in an abusive household when I was younger. When I was a child, my mom had abusive boyfriends, and I know what living in that household, waking up wishing that you didn't wake up. Waking up in the morning wishing that you had taken your last breath in the middle of the night so that you didn't have to wake up to the taunts and the abuse and the belittling and the horrid situations that were going to go on during your day because the bully lived there and the bully was there making your life miserable. So their quality of life couldn't have been that great. Sure, they were alive, but was it a life worth living? Okay. So I imagine that this is what the life of the Israelites were like. Not a life worth living. Just a life in fear and cowering before their bully. See here, the saying, fear keeps them alive, is absolutely going to ring true. But what was their quality of life like? They had frozen. So let's enter David. Okay, we all know King David, a man after God's own heart. So let's enter David. And we're going to read chapter 17, verses 12 and 13, and then we're going to skip over to 20 through 33. Okay, so if you're following along. 1 Samuel 17, 12 and 13, then 20 to 33. Now David was the son of the Ephrathite. We're going to go with Ephrathite. Of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in years, in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to battle. Now we're going to go down to 20. So David arose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in a battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. Then as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines. And he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that a man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. So whoever goes against Goliath and beats him will get great riches, will be married to the princess, and his family will never have to pay taxes again." Like, that is some awesome rewards. So let's pause right here and let's talk about fear. I was plagued with fear. I told you about not driving in the middle lane of the highway, not wanting to have intimate conversations, not wanting to swim in the dark. Who knows what else? I mean, there were just countless fears. I overcame those fears for the most part. Like, fear shows itself all the time. But I remember talking to God and writing out fear. And if you're in recovery, you probably heard fear means false evidence appearing real. But that didn't sit right with me. That's not what fear meant to me. So like, I wrote it out, and fear, the words finding excuses and retreating, like, that's what I would do. I would avoid parties. I'd get invited to Christian parties or get invited to sisters from the church, get invited to their house, and I would avoid that because I was afraid. So I'd find an excuse and retreat, run away. I just would not do the things that I was afraid of. And I remember being at a service, it was a worship service, and I wrote finding excuses and retreating, and it was just like something had broke at that moment when I realized that's what I did. So for the first time, I got up and I worshiped freely. Like, I was waving flags and I was jumping around and I was dancing, and I was just like, for real, fear was gone for me. And then for the very first time, like, as I am waving flags, and I've never waved flags, and then somebody handed me a second one, I'm waving 2 of them. It doesn't matter that it looks ridiculous. I'm smacking the sticks into one another. It doesn't matter because I free and there's no fear holding me back. All of a sudden, for the very first time, the man on the stage says, I'm no longer a slave to fear. And it was the first time I had ever heard that song, and my eyes welled up with tears, because for the first time ever, someone was singing the words of my heart. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. And at that moment, the fears that had plagued my life were broken. Now, don't get me wrong, fear still shows itself, and I'm going to kind of get to that here in a minute. But, so like I told you, my fear was broken. This was like six years ago. And when I first started to date my husband 3 years ago, I had no fear of driving with him. None whatsoever. I completely trusted him. I completely trusted my God. I knew that while he was driving the car, I was completely safe, no problem. After we'd gotten married, I was cleaning the church, and it was a Saturday night, and we were going to go out of town. But church was Sunday morning, and there was a wedding at the church, and they needed the church clean before Sunday. So we went late. It was like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. We cleaned the church, and we still wanted to go to the mountain, so we decided to drive up that night. And on the way up the mountains, there's no street lights, there's no reflectors in the road. You're lucky that there's lines painted in the road. All of a sudden, for the first time in a long time, I was afraid. I completely trusted my husband, but it was dark and it was scary out there, and we couldn't even drive with our brights on because there was too many cars on the road. I don't know why there were so many cars on the road, but for the first time I was really scared, and I made it known to him, and then my fear became contagious. Like, I was afraid, so he became afraid, and he started driving really slowly, and it was like a rough one. We got there safe and sound, but I couldn't believe how afraid I was and how my fear had become contagious. So fear reared its ugly head when I was driving with my husband in the dark in the mountains. I got scared, my fear caused him to fear, and it became contagious. That was sort of what was going on with the Israelites. So Saul was afraid of Goliath. The Israelites were afraid of Goliath. And then in comes David. So I want to read to you David's stuff. We're going to read now we're going to read 34 through 37. And it says, But David said to Saul, Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. Oh, wait, no. Did I read through 33 yet? 20 through 33. Come down. I know your pride and insolence. No, I haven't read that part. I didn't read till 33. I'm sorry. So I talked about the riches. So now it says, Then David spoke to the man who stood by him, saying, What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine, and who takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in this manner, saying, So shall it be done for the man who kills him. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he said, Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and your insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. You're a nosy Rosie, and you want to see what's going on, is basically what Eliab said. And David said, What have I done now? Is there not a cause? Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. Then David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant, me, David, the youngest of 8 boys, probably smaller than the small, not a warrior, not in the army, not one of your soldiers, but your servant, I will go against this Philistine to fight with him. Then David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. So David's like, I will go. Ta-da! Send me, Lord. Here I am. Send me. And Saul said to David, You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. See, I talked a minute ago about my fear being contagious. And Saul's fear was contagious with the Israelites, and they just sat in a corner afraid for 30 days, 40 days, however many days it was that Goliath came out and taunted them and called them all kinds of names and belittled them and their God. And here comes David, and he's like, I'm not going to sit back and listen to this man talk about my people this way or talk about my God this way. I will fight him. Saul tried to make David afraid. He tried. He said to him, You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him. You are a youth, and he is a man of war since his youth. Basically, he said, you're going to lose. You're going to die. You won't get the riches. You won't get the princess. Your family will still have to pay taxes. You're going to lose. Don't even try it. But David was ready to fight. Okay, so are you guys ready for the funny part? Like, this is the funny part to me. Nobody wanted to fight Goliath. Nobody. They were afraid of him. They had no idea how to go about it. And then they get this little tiny kid who's like, I'll do it. All of a sudden, here's the funny part. They tell him how it needs to be done. Like Saul, the king of kings, not the king of kings, obviously. That's Jesus is the king of kings. But Saul, the first king of Israel. So right now, he is kind of the king of the kings because he's the first king of Israel. He refuses to fight in the name of his Lord, in the name of his country, in the name of his people. He refuses to fight. He's afraid. And yet he tells David how to do it. He makes David put on this armor that's way too big for him. So I'm going to read that. First, no one is ready or willing to fight, regardless of the rewards, not even the king. Rather, they would rather be tortured on a daily basis and not do anything, allowing fear to make them suffer, than to try to fight this giant and possibly be rewarded. Then David steps in, and now all of a sudden, they know what needs to be done and how to do it. I'm going to read verses 38 and 39. It says, So Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put on a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk. Saul, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, not Saul, but David had said to Saul, I cannot walk with these. So David took them off. So here Saul is trying to dress him up in his human armor, not the armor of the Lord, but in his human armor that was not made for David. Because see, back in these days, the armor was made specifically for the warrior. David could not fight in this armor. Saul's trying to tell him how to do it, but Saul refused to do it for himself. So why would he tell somebody else how to do it? And David said, I don't need that. I don't need any of that. I have the Lord. So, okay, here's my point. The Israelites don't trust one another. The Israelites don't trust their king. The Israelites don't trust themselves. And they don't trust God. They have no idea on how to fight the Philistines, how to fight this giant Goliath of Gath. They don't know how to overcome. They thought they would just wait. They thought they would just wait. I wonder how long they would wait. I mean, they had already waited for at least 30 days. I feel like I said 40 days. I'm not 100% sure. But I encourage you to look it up and then tell me in the comment section that I was right or wrong. Okay. So I wonder how long they would wait and what they thought they could get away with. See, there was a time where I had to go to a mission. I was homeless, and my mom told me that I had to go there. I could not stay with her any longer. It was Friday. She told me I had to go down there on Monday, and I had decided that I was going to wait her out. See, if she couldn't catch me, she couldn't make me go. So she would go to bed at an early hour. I wouldn't come home until after she went to sleep. She got up at an early hour to go to work, and I'd be asleep, so she couldn't send me. For 3 days I did that, and I thought for sure I could just do that for the rest of my life. If she never caught me, she could never send me to the mission. Well, she caught me, and I had to come down here. But I really had planned that at least for 10 years that I would just avoid her and continue to stay in her house. Okay, so it made me think, how long would the Israelites have waited? What did they think would happen? Did they think that he would get bored? Did they think he would forget? Or that maybe he would just grow old and die? But here comes David. He was not going to wait. He wasn't frozen in fear. He's the smallest of the small. He's ready and willing. He's trusting himself, but most of all, he's trusting God. He tells Saul that he took on lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! And that he could definitely take on this. Yet Saul, who couldn't even bother to attempt to take on the giant, was telling David, you can't do it. And then once he tells him he can't do it, tries to tell him how to do it. Wear this, use this, go there. Put on this armor, use this sword. David was being underestimated. God was being underestimated. David is the only one who truly trusts God in this place. But I'm sure he was still afraid. He's human. David's human. And it makes me think, like, I like to put myself in place of the people in the Bible on how it would be for me. So way back 16 years ago when I first came to the Lord, we used to watch a lot of this show called Veggie Tales. Some of you know it, some of you don't. But there was this one, Silly Songs with Larry, and it went, God is bigger than the boogeyman. He's bigger than Godzilla or the monsters on TV. So in my head, when I'm reading the story, I'm David, and I'm working my way out to go fight the giant Goliath, and I'm singing, God is bigger than the boogeyman. He's bigger than Godzilla. And that's a big giant. Like, that's how I see it happening in my head. I have to imagine David's human. So the minute he sees this man, there's some fear. There's some fear. David was human, but he trusts God. I trusted my husband every time he drove, but I'm human. And I got afraid. I'm sorry, I got distracted. So I imagine that David gets out there. Inside, he's shaking like a leaf. But he did not succumb to his fear. See, that's the difference. He may have been afraid, but he didn't freeze in his fear. He knows the Spirit of the Lord did not give him a spirit of fear. He knows that the Lord did not give him a spirit of fear. The Israelites may underestimate David and God. Goliath underestimated David and God. He taunted David, but David did not freeze, and he did not flee. I imagine he was afraid. It's human nature. He was probably afraid of the lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. But he didn't freeze. He still fought them off. He didn't run away. He still fought them off. See, our emotion of fear, this is like where God just, light bulb. Our emotion of fear can be overcome by an action of bravery. Airplane. Our emotion of fear can be overcome by an action of bravery. See, fear is just a feeling. It doesn't have to be our action. It's an emotion. It doesn't have to be our action. It doesn't have to be a verb. So I'm going to read to you verses 48 through 54. We're almost done here. I know I've got your attention. Hopefully I still have some of your attention 23 minutes in. So it was, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell onto his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road, even as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem. See, my point here is David was probably afraid. We may be afraid. In fact, there's nothing wrong with being afraid. Fear keeps us alive in some instances. Fear of the Lord is an amazing thing. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. Sometimes fear is wisdom, especially if it's fear of the Lord, or if it keeps you from walking off the end of a cliff without a parachute, or if it keeps you from jumping into the ocean if you don't know how to swim. Sometimes fear is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with being afraid. But allowing fear to rule us, being a slave to fear, that's the problem. Fear rearing its ugly head is not a problem. Not facing our fear, not fighting our fear, running from our fear, or freezing in the face of our fear, that's the problem. You can be afraid, but you can overcome it by trusting God. Knowing that God is your rear guard, knowing that God is your strong tower, knowing that all things work to the good, to your good, if you love God and are called according to your purpose. So even those dangerous things that have you afraid, if you love God and you are called according to his purpose, then even that will work to your good. I come from a long family of women who are afraid of the doctor. We don't go. In fact, my grandmother came out of the shower one time and blood was spurting out of the front of her calf. Just spraying. She didn't cut herself. It just like a vein opened up and it was like a horror movie. And she refused to go to the doctor. She wrapped it up and she goes, oh, I just have high blood pressure. A year later, my grandmother had a stroke and she's been bedridden ever since. She feared going to the doctor because they'd find something wrong with her. Guess what? There's something wrong with her anyway. If she would have went to the doctor, it might have helped. I feared going to the doctor. And it wasn't until I got married and he made me go. There's something wrong with me. I'm about to have surgery on Friday. But my fear would have kept me from going, and it could have got even worse. It may have taken me out if I would have frozen the face of my fear. But I faced my fear and I went forward. If I went to the doctor, they would have found something wrong with me. If I didn't go to the doctor, there was still something wrong with me. If I would not have gone to the doctor, I would have succumbed to the sickness that I have, the illness that I have. I'm having surgery on Friday, and my doctor is certain that that'll be the end of it. Facing our fears can improve the quality of our life. Fear may keep us alive, but what's the quality of life? Facing our fears, fighting our fears can improve the quality of our life. And more importantly, it strengthens our faith. How many times have you asked God for more faith? Guess what? He doesn't just go, poof, you got more faith. It's not like faith. No, he's not a genie. He's not just going to give you faith. What he's going to do is he's going to give you circumstances in order for you to exercise your faith. Your faith is a muscle. Fear is the opposite of faith. Do not let your fear freeze you. Do not run from it, but exercise it and know that the Lord has got your back. Lord, if there's anybody watching this video right now, I pray right now that you would touch them. Touch them, Lord. Give them boldness like never before. Allow them to speak your truth without fear of what people will think about them or say to them. Lord, I'm afraid what the comments are going to look like, God, but I will not allow it to keep me from speaking your truth into the words of those who will hear it. Lord, I love you, and I pray that anyone who has watched this video will not be a slave to their fear. Bless those that hear this and those that don't. In Jesus' name, amen.